The Earth has never stood still. Ice advanced, then retreated. Oceans rose, storms raged, and fire reshaped the land. Amid this chaos came a warm spell, quiet yet powerful enough to change the destiny of every living thing. From melting glaciers to the dawn of humankind, this is the story of the warm spell that changed everything. The Earth once trembled under the weight of an unforgiving ice age. Vast glaciers stretched across continents, their frozen hands gripping valleys and mountains alike. For thousands of years, the world had been defined by cold, an endless struggle between advancing ice and retreating seas. Rivers, locked in chains of frost, carved their paths with relentless patience. Winds howled across barren plains where survival was a privilege, not a promise. Yet, deep within the silent machinery of Earth's climate, a change had already begun. The planet's orbit shifted ever so slightly, tilting its axis toward a new alignment. The sun's warmth reached farther north, and the oceans, long subdued by cold, began to stir. Slowly, a thaw crept across the hemispheres. It was subtle at first, the cracking of ice sheets, the rise of hidden springs, the migration of animals sensing something that human eyes could not yet perceive. This was the birth of a warm spell, Amphi, interlude in Earth's icy rhythm. No sudden explosion, no single event announced it. Instead, the warmth seeped quietly into the fabric of the world, coaxing forests to return, inviting rains to nourish once barren soils, and summoning rivers to surge with newfound freedom. The ice, mighty and unyielding, began its reluctant retreat. Walls of frozen mountains collapsed into torrents of meltwater, carving valleys into dramatic gorges. Seas swelled, swallowing coastlines. The land reshaped itself, as though rewriting the very map of Earth. For creatures that had endured the glacial prisons of millennia, it was liberation. Mammoths roamed greener pastures, while herds of wild horses and bison thundered across reborn plains. But the transformation was not gentle. For every meadow that blossomed, floods devoured valleys. For every forest that rose, droughts punished other lands. The warm spell was no gift. It was upheaval. Civilizations yet unborn would inherit its consequences, and species would either adapt or vanish in its wake. The warm spell was only beginning, but already it carried the promise of reshaping the course of life on Earth. The ice was melting, the seas were rising, and the climate's balance was shifting toward an uncertain destiny. And as the ice released its hold, a question loomed. What forces lay behind this warming, and how would the planet, and those who walked upon it, endure? The change? The answer would unfold in storms, floods, and fire. Natural break, teaser for next chapter. From the first cracks of retreating glaciers, a chain reaction had been set in motion. In the next chapter, the oceans themselves awaken, becoming the restless architects of a new world. The Earth once trembled under the weight of an unforgiving ice age. Vast glaciers stretched across continents, their frozen hands gripping valleys and mountains alike. For the oceans, vast, unfathomable, and restless, became the stage upon which the warm spell revealed its true power. As glaciers crumbled and rivers poured their torrents into the seas, the balance of salt and water began to shift. Currents that had once flowed in steady silence now twisted and writhed like serpents. Deep beneath the surface, the conveyor belts of heat, the great thermohaline currents, stirred with unusual force. Warm waters surged northward, carrying the sun's energy to frozen latitudes. The polar seas, once sealed beneath icy armor, began to fracture and breathe. The oceans no longer acted as passive mirrors to the skies. They became architects of transformation. Storms rose from their depths with fury, unlike any the planet had known for millennia. Hurricanes bloomed over waters that had grown strangely warm, spinning walls of cloud and rain that battered the coasts. Shorelines vanished beneath relentless tides, while winds sculpted the dunes into strange new landscapes. Life responded in waves of migration. Fish, once confined to the tropics, explored new northern seas, while plankton, those invisible architects of Earth's atmosphere, flourished and altered the very breath of the planet. Birds followed, tracing invisible highways across continents, carried by winds that no longer obeyed ancient patterns. But this awakening was double-edged. As seas rose and currents shifted, some coasts found themselves drowned, while others were abandoned by the waters that once sustained them. Great inland seas swelled in sudden floods, while elsewhere rivers dried into dust. The oceans were no longer silent guardians of stability. They had become the restless heartbeat of a planet in flux. The warm spell was no gentle thaw, but a chain reaction, and the oceans carried its momentum forward. The world was entering a new rhythm, and with it, the seeds of chaos were sown. What lay ahead was more than melting ice and shifting seas. The atmosphere itself, stirred by rising heat and restless water, was about to awaken in storms of unimaginable scale. Natural break teaser for next chapter. In the next chapter, the skies themselves ignite. The age of colossal storms begins, reshaping the face of continents. The Earth once trembled under the weight of an unforgiving ice age. Vast glaciers stretched across continents, their frozen hands gripping valleys and mountains alike. For the oceans, vast, unfathomable, and restless, became the stage upon which the warm spell revealed its true power. As glaciers crumbled and rivers poured their torrents into the seas, the balance of salt and water began to shift. Currents that had once flowed in steady silence now twisted and writhed like serpents. Deep beneath the surface, the conveyor belts of heat, the great thermohaline currents, stirred with unusual force. Warm waters surged northward, carrying the sun's energy to frozen latitudes. The polar seas, once sealed beneath icy armor, began to fracture and breathe. The oceans no longer acted as passive mirrors to the skies. They became architects of transformation. Storms rose from their depths with fury unlike any the planet had known for millennia. Hurricanes bloomed over waters that had grown strangely warm, spinning walls of cloud and rain that battered the coasts. Shorelines vanished beneath relentless tides, while winds sculpted the dunes into strange new landscapes. The skies had long mirrored the moods of the earth below, but now they became a force of their own. Fed by warming oceans and shifting winds, the atmosphere swelled with energy. What began as subtle changes in cloud and breeze soon grew into tempests of staggering ferocity. Storms erupted across the horizon, born of heat and water in violent union. Towering clouds, black as mountains, clawed at the heavens. Lightning split the skies in blinding cascades, striking forests and igniting infernos that consumed landscapes already strained by change. Where rain fell, it was no gentle nourishment, but a deluge. Rivers swollen into monsters, plains drowned beneath endless sheets of water. Hurricanes, once rare intrusions, became regular tyrants of the seas. They churned across warm waters with unfathomable strength. their spirals stretching for hundreds of miles, tearing at coastlines with wind and wave. Entire regions were reshaped not over centuries, but in hours. Shorelines crumbled, forests flattened, and valleys carved anew by torrents of flood. Yet in other corners of the earth, the opposite unfolded. As air currents twisted unpredictably, rain abandoned some lands entirely. Deserts expanded their dominion, swallowing fertile valleys in waves of sand. Crops that had once clung to life in harsh climates now withered in silence, leaving barren ground behind. Life adapted as it always had, but never without loss. Herds of animals shifted their migrations to escape floods or drought, following the rhythm of survival written in instinct. Birds were carried into new skies by altered winds, some thriving, others vanishing forever. Species that had endured. The Ice Age found themselves unprepared for storms of such scale. The warm spell, once whispered through cracks in the ice, was now screamed through thunder and gale. The atmosphere, stirred to violence, reshaped the surface of the Earth itself. The planet had entered an age of storms, a crucible where survival was tested with every strike of lightning, every roaring wave, every gust of merciless wind. But, even as the storms raged, a quieter transformation was taking root. Beneath the soil, forests were returning, reclaiming land abandoned by ice. Green was spreading once more across the continents, a silent counterbalance to the violence above. The warm spell was not only destruction, it was renewal. Out of fire, flood, and tempest, new ecosystems would rise, fragile at first, but destined to shape the world to come. As the skies unleashed their fury, the earth below endured, and then began to transform. From the ruins of storm and flood, a quieter miracle unfolded. Forests stirred, grasslands stretched, and life, ever resilient, began to reclaim the scars left by ice and tempest. In the north, once barren tundra softened beneath warmer suns. Where glaciers had retreated, fertile soil emerged, rich with minerals ground from ancient stone. Seeds carried by wind and bird found their chance to root. Saplings stretched toward the light, weaving together into vast woodlands. These forests, young yet relentless, spread like green tides across the continents, binding the soil and breathing new life into the air. The grasslands, too, awoke. Sweeping plains once crushed beneath ice unfurled into seas of gold and green. Tall grasses bent with the wind, offering sanctuary for herds that now roamed in countless numbers. Mammoths, bison, and wild horses thundered across horizons, their migrations shaping the land as surely as rivers and storms. Predators followed, their eyes sharp and unyielding, woven into this expanding web of survival. Everywhere, life seized opportunity. Rivers once swollen with floods settled into steady flows, carving valleys rich with vegetation. Wetlands teemed with birds, fish, and insects, their songs echoing through lands that had not known such vibrancy for tens of thousands of years. Insects swarmed in clouds, pollinating forests and fields, weaving invisible threads that stitched ecosystems together. But this rebirth was not uniform. Some lands prospered under the new warmth, while others suffered. Forests encroached on old grasslands, pushing grazing herds into harsher terrain. Drought-stricken valleys became graveyards, their soil cracking beneath relentless suns. Balance was always fleeting, and every gain carried loss. Still, the warm spell marked a new chapter for Earth's living tapestry. Diversity bloomed in every corner, ecosystems rising in intricate layers. The scars of storm and flood faded beneath vines, roots, and leaves, as though the earth itself sought to heal. Yet this flourishing carried deeper consequences. With each forest that grew and each plain that expanded, the atmosphere shifted again. More carbon was drawn into the living world, altering the balance of air and sky. The planet was breathing differently now, its rhythm changed by the very life it had nurtured. For now, it was a time of abundance, of rebirth. But abundance never lasts unchallenged. In the heart of this flourishing world, fire and drought lurked, ready to remind life of its fragility. The warm spell had brought forests, plains, and abundance, but balance on Earth was always fleeting. In the very heart of renewal, chaos stirred again. Where storms had once ruled, now fire and drought claimed dominion. The forests that spread across continents became both sanctuary and fuel. Summers grew longer, drier, and harsher, and the trees, thick with life, turned tinder under merciless suns. Lightning, born from the restless skies, struck with violent precision, igniting wildfires that consumed landscapes in roaring infernos. Flames raced across the grasslands, devouring fields of gold and blackening the soil beneath. The air itself thickened with smoke, blotting out the sun and suffocating the lungs of creatures that fled before the blaze. Herds stampeded toward rivers, their panicked thunder echoing for miles, while predators abandoned the hunt to survive alongside prey. In fire, the rules of survival dissolved. Everything burned alike. And when the flames passed, the land bore scars, ash-strewn fields, forests reduced to skeletal remains, and rivers clogged with the remains of what once lived. Yet, from this devastation, green always returned. Fire was destruction, but also rebirth. Seeds that required heat to awaken cracked open in the ashes, and new growth emerged where old giants had fallen. But fire was not the only trial. Where rains once came in abundance, droughts now seized the land. Rivers shrank into threads. Lakes retreated into cracked basins, and plains that once fed herds turned to dust. Winds carried the soil away in clouds, reshaping valleys into barren wastelands. Animals wandered farther and farther in search of water, their migrations growing desperate, their survival uncertain. This was the dual nature of the warm spell. Growth and death, abundance and scarcity, intertwined like the threads of a tapestry, forever torn and rewoven. For life, every season became a gamble. Adaptation was no longer a slow dance across centuries, but a relentless test with each passing year. The strongest endured. The fragile vanished into silence. And in this crucible of extremes, the stage was being prepared, not only for the survival of animals and plants, but for something else. A new force was waiting to rise, one that would watch the storms, endure the droughts, and eventually learn to shape fire itself. The warm spell was more than a climate event. It was the prelude to humanity. The warm spell had transformed the planet. Ice had retreated, oceans had surged, storms had raged, forests had risen, and fires had burned. Through it all, life endured, reshaped, tested, and refined by the crucible of change. Out of this shifting world, a new creature emerged to claim its place: humanity. For countless generations, small bands of hominins had struggled against the cold grip of the Ice Age. They clung to survival in caves, followed herds across frozen steppes, and battled hunger with stone and fire. But as the earth warmed, opportunities unfolded before them. Valleys once locked in ice blossomed into fertile lands. Rivers swelled with fish, forests teemed with game, and plants flourished in places where only frost had reigned. The climate that challenged beasts with storms and drought also gifted humankind with possibility. They learned to move with the seasons, to track the migrations of animals across the reborn plains, and to harvest the bounty of plants that spread with the warmth. Fire, once feared, became a tool. The storms that carved landscapes left behind, rivers and lakes that sustained communities. In chaos, they found adaptation. In change, they found strength. Generation by generation, humankind grew more than bodies of flesh and bone. They grew in thought. They began to remember patterns, to anticipate seasons, to imagine futures. The warm spell did more than alter the earth. It carved the conditions that allowed minds to expand. From here, everything would change. The forests and plains of the warm earth became the cradle of civilization. Agriculture would rise, cities would form, and history itself would begin. All because the earth, in its eternal rhythm, had chosen warmth over ice. Yet the lesson of this story lingered in every storm cloud, every flood, every fire. Climate was no passive backdrop. It was the silent architect of fate. And as humanity spread across the globe, they became the first species to not only endure its shifts, but to alter them. The warm spell that had lifted humankind from the shadows of the Ice Age was both a gift and a warning. For the climate that gives life can just as easily take it away. And so, the story of Earth's ancient warmth ends not with finality, but with continuity. The same forces that once toppled glaciers and stirred oceans remain with us today. The Adidi winds still shift. The seas still rise. The storms still gather. The question is no longer how the Earth will endure, but how humanity will.